What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kennahan, and today I am joined by the multi-talented Ben Strober. Ben, how are we doing today?
Good, man. Good day over at 1067 The Fan, producing for Linnell Willingham's show. We talked a lot of Commanders today, so going to bring some of that to the table here today for keeping up with the Commanders. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome, man. I can't wait for this episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. Today, we are going to be talking about, we'll start things off with talking a little bit about Terry McLaurin and his current contract negotiations, where things currently stand with him and the Washington Commanders. Then we'll move into what are some of the biggest position battles, because we've got mandatory minicamp starting up this Tuesday. So it's going to be a lot of fun this episode, but let's just jump right into it. Terry McLaurin and the Washington Commanders, it's been well known throughout this offseason that, Terry's heading into the last year of his contract. He just had his best season of his career so far, and it really seems like he's found a connection with, now going into sophomore year, Jaden Daniels. Should we be worried about this holdout at all? What are your thoughts on, Terry not attending, optional voluntary OTAs and the voluntary offseason workouts so far? This is going to be a pretty big week for Terry and the Commanders as now mandatory practices begin this Tuesday.
I'm not worried about it, but I wouldn't say it's impossible that they're unable to get something done. I'm pretty confident that the Commanders are going to be able to work something out because he knows how much he means to this franchise. Adam Peters and Lance Newmark know how big a part of what they're trying to build goes through Terry McLaurin. And we saw this play out just 4 years ago, back in 2021, because the way he set himself up was to get another big payday in his career. When he signed that extension, it happened on June 28th in 2021. He missed the voluntary OTAs, so not a problem with that. He is holding out, to get his contract in place that he needs to get his last payday, or big payday, I should say, in his career. I mean, the only thing that you think really holds him back maybe is because he's going into his age 30 season, but coming off a career year, you finally scratch the surface of how good he can be with a really talented quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who we expect to only get better. I think both sides are going to be able to come to an agreement on a deal. I think the guaranteed money is really the only thing that's going to hold him up. The DK Metcalf contract is kind of where this is going to, that kind of sets the table for what Terry McLaurin is probably going to get, because Metcalf got around $60 million guaranteed. I'd expect McLaurin to get $65 million. I think that seems about fair for him. And as Albert Breer said, not in a great place at the moment, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be in a good place a couple weeks from now when more negotiations take place, once OTAs really come to an end, and that kind of leaves Peters and Newmark maybe a little bit more time to sit down with McLaurin, his agent, and figure out the deal that works for him. I know for a fact that number for the AAV is going to start with a 3. It's just a matter of where.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I do agree with you. I think it's the guaranteed money that's kind of holding this thing up. I'd expect this deal to probably be in the 3-year range for an extension here, and probably end up somewhere in the high 90s in terms of overall final money over those 3 years. Now, this contract and this negotiation, you mentioned the Albert Breer report. There have been some other reports. I'm just going to read what Jordan Schultz initially reported the other day, which kind of, put Commanders Twitter into a little bit of a frenzy after reading the way Jordan Schultz worded his tweet. So he said, Commanders All-Pro wide receiver Terry McLaurin has made it clear to the team that he's frustrated with the lack of progress on a long-term deal. As I previously reported, or as Jordan Schultz previously reported, McLaurin unexpectedly left voluntary workouts after initially attending, and it remains to be seen whether he'll report for mandatory minicamp. McLaurin's ending the final year of his contract, which we talked about. Talks have been minimal. Now, the way Jordan Schultz reported this, it sounds like, Terry McLaurin, he said he's frustrated. I don't remember the last time I saw Terry McLaurin, frustrated. He's not someone that I feel would ever get frustrated over a situation like this. Do you think this is just, Terry's agent giving Jordan some information here, just to try and kickstart and keep on successfully completing some talks with this contract negotiation between Washington and Adam Peters and, Terry McLaurin? Or do you think Terry is actually, frustrated, as Jordan said?
I think this is absolutely agent speak.
Yeah.
At this point, given what we know about Terry McLaurin, not only as a football player, but as a person, just who he is, kind of the way he carries himself. He's never been somebody that has complained publicly or shown visible frustration. I'm sure he's been plenty frustrated at points in his NFL career. I mean, he was drafted by this team in 2019. That tells you everything to know why he could have been frustrated. He played with 12 different quarterbacks over the course of his career, and he still chose to sign the extension back in 2021. And at that time, I wasn't even really optimistic that they were going to get a long-term deal with him just because of the inconsistency they had with quarterback play for so many years. It kind of just felt like maybe the writing was on the wall for McLaurin to get a big payday from somebody else at some point in his career and try to go win. But, he stuck it out with this organization. I think he takes a lot of pride in the fact that he's one of the original. I mean, think about it at this point. He is maybe, no, I think Deron Payne actually fits this category. There's a couple of these players that he was a Redskin, Washington
Jeremy
football
Reeves
teamer,
too, yeah.
and now a Commander. That is a very Reed of player, and he's still a really talented player. He just had his career year in his age 29 season and broke the single season record for receiving touchdowns for this Washington franchise, which is, no small task that he really did last year for this Washington team, and how pivotal he was in the success they had getting all the way to the NFC Championship game. So I do think at this point it is agent speak. Maybe behind the scenes a little bit, he hopes that things can get moving a little quicker. Maybe he said something to his agent. I definitely want to get this deal done as soon as possible so I can get back to these team activities. So maybe that's where his agent gets the idea to point out a little bit of frustration that he wants the deal to get done sooner rather than later, which I think is fine. I'm not concerned at this point, with any of that at all. And we know this Commanders organization under Adam Peters and the new front office, they don't leak anything at all.
No.
Anytime people think they know what Adam Peters is thinking or what's going on behind the scenes, Adam Peters will throw everyone for a loop. Nobody ever knows what's going on, so that's not anything that's coming from the Commanders camp either. There's no way.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with what you said there, and it's a good point. Like you look at in the past, over the past, year plus, Adam Peters has been the general manager for this team. The Jane Daniels versus Drake May, we didn't really know, even up until I think the day of the draft, where I think Commanders fans started to get a good feel of who Washington was picking at number 2. But the week before, you had all the Top Golf drama. You had, Jane Daniels' agent on Twitter with some, mysterious emojis.
We
There
had
was a
J.J.
lot going
McCarthy
on.
as projected
Yeah,
to go here at some point for
yeah,
whatever reason.
yeah. You even had a guy like McCarthy, a wild card, potentially being the number 2 overall pick. So, in the Sam Cosmi extension too, I want to point that out. That didn't happen until September 4th. That was, I
Yeah,
believe, the night of the season opener on Thursday Night Football for whoever was in that last year. I kind of forgot, but
I do remember
uh,
that.
it was like right before week 1, and Cosmi was someone who I believe did not attend voluntary workouts, but he ended up reporting for training camp and had all of that last off season. So you look at Terry
Mhm.
McLaurin and mandatory minicamp coming up this Tuesday through Thursday. I wouldn't expect him to be out there, and I wouldn't blame him. Like, you don't want to get hurt when you're not really guaranteed any money after this season. You're in a contract year, and again, you get fined by the team if you don't show up for these mandatory practices, but that all can be, paid back through the contract, and the
Yeah.
team doesn't, like, they don't have to fine them. It's just they're able to,
It's
if
not
they don't.
Lamar because Lamar
Yes.
is forfeiting so
Yeah.
much money, all like
Mhm.
missing OTAs. And one, I don't really understand why he's missing OTAs. He's not up for contract extension.
No.
Obviously, he's not negotiating that. He's just missing it, and he's
Mhm.
forfeiting massive sums of money, like the kind of money that you would make in 10 years as a normal person. It's
Yes.
crazy.
Yeah. So it's um definitely something to keep an eye on, I would say, this Terry extension. I would be kind of surprised if it gets dragged out and all the way up until the point where we saw Sam Cosmi, getting an extension only a few days before the first game of the regular season. I'd be pretty shocked if it goes into September and Terry doesn't have a contract extension from Washington, but I wouldn't expect anything, before the first day of
Yeah.
mandatory minicamp. Maybe we get something while minicamp is happening, and some players, just get that feeling of, hey, I want to be back on this field, and maybe I'll lower my bar just a little bit for this contract, just because I'm itching to get out back on this field and catching passes from Jane Daniels or the quarterback. So overall, though, I'm not really worried about this. I think you can say the same
Yeah.
of towards this extension, and if it will get done, Terry wants to be in Washington, I think, for his entire career, and I would be very very shocked if we see otherwise after this season. So, but
Absolutely.
that'll pretty much wrap things up on Terry McLaurin and his potential extension with Washington. Now let's jump into some position battles because, like I mentioned, we got mandatory minicamp starting this week. So we're going to start to see, even though it's only 3 days, we're going to start to see some early signs of some position battles throughout this roster, which I think when you think about position battles for the Washington Commanders, it immediately jumps to the offensive line. After Washington drafted Josh Connolly Jr. with their first round pick, it sounds like Connolly is expected to be the starter week 1, or it's most likely going to be the starter week 1 at right tackle. But it'll be interesting to see what are they going to do with Brandon Coleman. Are they going to have him at right tackle, Connolly at right guard? I think the more likely scenario is Coleman starts at left guard and, Connolly starts at right tackle. But what are your thoughts on kind of the offensive line here? And what are you expecting to see early on, or maybe some, um, let's just say some different line changes early on throughout minicamp so far?
I mean, there's going to be a ton of competition
Mm-hmm.
at a lot of position, and offensive line is definitely a big
Yeah.
one that you've hit on. The only person that Adam Peters said in one of his pressers earlier this offseason that did not have to compete for his role was Laramie Tunsil, of course, who they trade for in the offseason because he's an all-pro left tackle. He's not competing for a spot. He has not shown up to voluntary OTAs, but he has posted that he is getting work in behind the scenes. And he's been someone that never goes to OTAs throughout his career. So another thing I'm not really worried about at this point. But the interior is really where you're left with the question because obviously you don't have Sam Cosmi for probably at least half the season. I wouldn't
Yeah.
expect him to be back until maybe around Halloween or sometime. So then you have some holes that you have to fill right now. You have Nick Allegretti, who was your starting left guard last year, but I mean, does Brandon Coleman make a little bit more sense right there? Then you have him and Nate Herbig, or Allegretti and Herbig, compete for that spot over there on the right side because I think Nate Herbig was actually a very underrated signing for
Mm-hmm.
this team. Had a pretty decent role with Pittsburgh, and I think he's a guy who could see his role increase with this Washington team because I think Allegretti, he was serviceable. I think he was a solid upgrade for what this offensive line had to do last offseason. But overall, I think Herbig is a guy that could compete for that spot. Then you also have to throw Trent Scott in the mix here. He might be someone that becomes like that new swing tackle that Cornelius Lucas was for this team for various years. There's going to be a lot of competition at those spots. I think Connerly will eventually get the right tackle job, as you alluded to earlier, but he's going to have to earn it, which I think is important. I think you always need to have battles in camp. Nobody other than really proven players at this point in the NFL should have the starting spot locked up just because they're a first round draft choice or they were signed or whatever. I think there's going to be a lot of competition in other positions as well. Offensive line's a good place to start, though.
Yeah, and through OTAs, like you mentioned, Laramie Tunsil was not there, so we saw a lot of different combinations at OTAs and at the voluntary practices so far that have been open to the media because your starting left tackle going into week 1 was not there. So I wouldn't take much of any things you've probably seen through OTAs because I'm pretty sure they've played with Carnley pretty much all up and down the line at this point, and Coleman's been out there at all that left guard, left tackle, right tackle, and right guard so far. So they're kind of just, messing around, seeing what they have. Will any of these combinations, click? But once we get into these mandatory practices, once we get into training camp again in July, we'll start to see, that starting five form. And a name you didn't mention that I think is definitely kind of adds to the flexibility for this Washington offensive line is Andrew Wiley, because
Mm-hmm.
Wiley could be that guy that ends up starting at right guard with, Sam Cosmi out for probably the first at least month of the season, I would say.
Yeah, I don't even
So,
know how I like
yeah,
forgot about him for a
yeah.
second, but he's definitely going to have a competitive chance to be a starter at guard for this team.
Mhm. Yeah, so if I had to make, claim now and say who that starting five is going to be, I'd probably say it's Tunsil at left tackle. Then we've got Coleman at left guard, Biotish at center, right guard's Wiley, and right tackle is Connolly. But I would not be shocked if that isn't the starting five, even though that's probably, if you ask 100 Commanders fans that are really into the team what their starting five offensive lineman looks like going into week one, it'd probably be what I said. But at the same time, maybe Coleman ends up being that swing tackle that comes in for whoever starts, if it's Connolly at right tackle and Tunsil, at left tackle. If they ever need an extra tackle out there, extra offensive lineman, maybe Coleman's that guy, and he is that Trent Scott or that Cornelius Lucas that we've seen over the last few years. But Wiley, I think, would probably be the most likely starter or the favorite to be that right guard, or to win that right guard job, just because he's played that position before. But what are your thoughts here on, what would be your starting five going into week one if you had to make a call now?
Okay, so the easiest three, of course, Tunsil on the left, Biotish in the middle, and then on the right, Connerly.
Mhm.
And I think I'm going to give the edge right now. This is kind of a bold take, but I think Nate Herbig is going to be the right
Okay.
guard for this football team. I think he's a durable player. I think he's someone that they're going to find throughout camp that they might be able to rely on him very well. And if he's not the starting guy, I'm sure he'll rotate in and out quite often with either Andrew Wiley or Nick Allegretti. And then at left guard, I think Brandon Coleman goes over there. I think Coleman is going to be really good as a
Mhm.
guard. I think that best suits his skill sets because the proof is really in the pudding for the way he played last year when he was this team's left tackle for the entire season. As a rookie, I think he showed
Mhm.
some really nice things until he got banged up a little bit, and I think he wasn't moving as well. And the way he moves laterally, I think, is the biggest fault to his game. He's a guy that's so strong that when he gets his hands on you, the play's over. So I think you kick him inside to guard, gives you an opportunity to get your hands on the defensive lineman better in his position. So I think he's going to excel actually at the guard position. I'm really excited to see him move over there.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. I know Coleman's probably definitely the favorite to be that starting left guard because he's played on that left side already. And like you mentioned, a rookie left tackle last season, playing pretty much the entire season whenever he was healthy at left tackle and becoming this, team's starting left tackle. That's a big ask. And, we know this coaching staff likes him and this front office likes him because they drafted him in that third round. But again, his probably best bet right now to play is at that guard position, even though he played tackle last year. But let's move on now to another position that maybe is not as important, as two of your starting or three of your starting offensive lineman spots. But the RB3 position is going to have a lot of competition this summer because Washington in the seventh round of the draft drafted Arizona running back Ja'Cory Cross-Merritt to already add to a kind of not really so, top end heavy running back room, but a
Hmm.
running back room that has had a lot of depth on the back end, I feel, over the last couple of years. You look at guys like Jeremy McNichols, who came in as, I believe, a free agent and ended up being one of Washington's best pass pro running backs last year. And then Chris Rodriguez, even though he wasn't originally a part of the Peters, regime, he was here before that. He as well has shown flashes when he's been on the field. What are your thoughts now on probably all those three running backs, Krosky, Merritt, Rodriguez, and McNichols, all fighting for that RB3 spot to back up Robinson and Eckler as the first two?
I'm happy you said Robinson, Eckler getting backed up because I think a lot of Commanders fans have already jumped the gun on a guy
Yeah.
like Krosky Merritt. He didn't play last year. I know he dominated in the Shrine Bowl. I believe that was the name of it, right? Yeah, so he
Yep.
dominates in the Shrine Bowl and eventually gets his name called as a seventh round pick. And some people, even Brian Mitchell, have said they think he's a seventh round misnomer because of how talented and what he has put on tape throughout his college career. But, to say that he is going to be the starting running back for this football team week one is absolutely ludicrous. I'd like to see
Yeah.
him probably be the running back three, but you have to, keep in account how Jeremy McNichols was last year in pass protection, which is really, really important to a Cliff Kingsbury offense. And Anthony Lynn takes a
Mhm.
lot of pride in what they do in pass protection. I think even at times when Brian Robinson last year struggled running the football, primarily because he was banged up and also because of some injuries to the offensive line that made it really tough for them to get pushed, especially in the middle of the field. He was always very good in pass protection. That's a plus for Brian Robinson. I think he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder this year and have a lot to prove because he could be a candidate that if he doesn't have the year he's looking the year that Adam Peters and them are looking for, if he doesn't dominate on the ground and kind of get back to where he was maybe a year ago in 2023, He could potentially be on his way out of Washington. So this is a make or break year for Brian Robinson. I expect him to have a pretty good year for this team. Austin Eckler will serve in the role that he did last year pretty well. I think if he can stay healthy, that's the biggest thing with Eckler. I think
Mhm.
this will probably be his last year here, just because he probably gets hurt at some point again this year.
Yeah.
Just a matter of when. And I mean, the concussions is
Yeah.
just ridiculous for
Uh,
Austin Eckler. I'm feeling for him. I really hope
mhm.
he doesn't hinder himself in his future because he keeps getting brain injuries on the football field of some sort. But I think there's going to be a lot of competition in the running back room. I think that you kind of hit it on the head right there with Robinson taking the lead back role, at least, to start the year. Krosky Merritt, a guy who will definitely get his fair share of opportunities for this team. He'll definitely be on the team. It's just kind of a matter of how they distribute those carries throughout the year and how those guys develop. If Krosky Merritt can find himself being excellent in pass protection or at least reliable at that point, that'll help him get on the football field.
Yeah. Yeah, and Krosky Merritt, like you mentioned, is getting a lot of love right now from the Washington fan base, and I do think the expectations for him currently are pretty high, just from Washington fans. Seeing the numbers that he put up in his what was it his fifth year in college, because last year was his sixth year. So he's been in college since I believe 2019 or 2018. So he's already on the older side coming out as a running back, which you don't entirely love to see. And
Kind of like
especially after
Robinson
coming,
was.
kind of like Robinson was. And again, you mentioned he only played in one game last season for Arizona, which he ran for over 100 yards and I believe 2 touchdowns. So he put up some good numbers, but with eligibility issues, he did not play the rest of the year. He ended up being the offensive MVP in the East West Shrine Bowl game, which was also one of the reasons why he kind of rose up in draft stock even after only playing in one game in his final college season. But Krosky Merritt is someone I think Washington could potentially see as a developmental guy to eventually have a significant role in this backfield, just because you look at Robinson, Eckler, and Chris Rodriguez. All three of those guys don't have a contract for 2026 with this team. So it could potentially be you could potentially be losing a large portion of your running game next season. Now, again, Jane Daniels as well, and I expect Deebo Samuel to also play a role in that running backfield and in the run game. But Krosky Merritt and Jeremy McNichols currently are the only two backs that are under contract for 2026, which is something to note as well. So Krosky Merritt, I think, would probably be the favorite to be the RB3, but I think there was a real competition between him and McNichols. I put Chris Rodriguez a step back, but a step behind or a couple steps behind those two guys, just because even though we've seen some flashes from him when he's out there on the field, he wasn't someone that Adam Peters brought in. And so again, you kind of have more leeway to release players or trade away players that we've seen that aren't really that you didn't bring in yourself. We saw that with
Yeah.
Jahan Dotson, for example, and how maybe that was kind of shocking for Washington fans. But Adam Peters, that he wasn't part of Adam Peters' plan moving forward. It wasn't someone that Adam Peters brought in. So he brought in both McNichols and Krosky Merritt. So I really think the RB3 position is down between those two guys. But let's move on to the next one now. And we'll stay on the offensive side. The wide receiver position, especially on the back end, Washington last year kept 6 wide receivers. So if we go ahead and say they're going to keep 6 wide receivers again this year, I feel like 5 of them are pretty solidified. You have Terry McLaurin, you have Deebo Samuel, uh, you have Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane, and I'm forgetting one other guy
Noah
that I
Brown.
know. Noah Brown. Noah Brown. All right. That's 5. And then the 6th guy is going to be one of KJ Osborne, Michael Gallup, Ja'Cory Brooks, Kaz Allen, you name it. There's a lot of guys I think that could be fighting for that wide receiver 6 position. And potentially that guy may not even be on the roster right now. What are your thoughts on early looks at the wide receiver room heading into mini camp and training camp and
I've heard a
potentially
lot
who
of
could
good things actually from OTAs about KJ
oh,
Osborne, which
mm-hmm.
surprised me a little bit because when he was here, he was pretty much inactive for most of the games that he
Yeah.
was in Washington in the postseason and even down the stretch in the regular season. But he was really banged up. He was really hurt at that point, so there was really no reason for him to be playing in those games, and that maybe just puts in the back burner of your mind a little bit that maybe Adam Peters envisioned him being a guy that they brought in at that time, not because they thought they were going to get much out of him last year, but maybe in the future. And if he does indeed have a very good mini camp and then into training camp, I could see him being a guy that makes this roster because he's talented. He had some very good years in Minnesota, and I could see him being a candidate to make this football team. And Michael Gallup, of course, who they bring in, he's still pretty young. I mean, I couldn't believe what his age was when I found out he was coming out of retirement because he's 29, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe so. I'm checking
he's
right now.
29 years old, so he's probably got something left in the tank. I'm not sure how taking the year or whatever he had off from football, is going to affect the way he is. But there's going to be some really interesting competition at that position as well. And even you think about it for a guy like Luke McCaffrey, this is a really important year for him because I don't know if his spot is necessarily safe. I don't think he'd be a guy that gets cut because he is a former third-round pick from a year ago. So it just seems unlikely that Adam Peters would be willing to cut someone that he drafted in the third round a year ago. But he's going to have to prove himself a lot more because there were times last year where he was almost invisible, and there's a lot of talk that he was getting open, wasn't getting the ball. We're going to see how true that was really this year. This is going to be a big year for him and big camp for him.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Michael Gallup. He's actually younger than Terry McLaurin.
It's
So
absurd, and I feel like
yeah.
if you watch his highlight tape from when he was young, he was playing against the Redskins, killing them in like 2018. Yeah. So I guess he was 21 or something then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was that's definitely pretty shocking. You mentioned Luke McCaffrey. I think his spot is safe ultimately. I'd be pretty shocked if he doesn't make his second 53-man roster, especially after Adam Peters drafted him in the third round. But one name I do want to mention is UDFA wide receiver Ja'Cory Brooks. I was talking with Sam Fortier on last week's pod, and he mentioned how Brooks was someone that stood out to him in OTAs and in voluntary practices so far. So Brooks could be someone, be this year's Mitch Tinsley or this year's Kaz Allen that a lot of fans, start to like and want as their wide receiver 6, just to take a chance on. So Brooks is someone that I would keep an eye on. But beyond that, that is pretty much the 3 main positions I wanted to look at here with some key position battles heading into training camp. So Ben, where can people find your work as we wrap up?
Sure, you can find me on Twitter at Ben Strober Media or on Instagram at Strober Sports, STROBER Sports. I can often be heard on 106.7 The Fan of the Team 980 when I'm producing for various shows over there. And then, of course, always now one of the hosts for the Locked On Wizards podcast. So you can check me and Abdullah Ayubi over there. We post every Monday through Friday covering the Washington Wizards all year long.
That's awesome. Yeah, and congrats on that because you're starting this week. So that'll wrap this up, though. That'll wrap this up, though, for this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I've been your host, Mason Kenahan. See you guys in the next one. Peace.